you go ahead and call roll for us?
Sure. The State Controller, Ms. Patton. Here. Mr. Keeley.
Here.
Mr. Rosenfield.
Here.
The Director of Finance, Ms. Ortega.
Chairperson Dillon, you have a quorum.
Thank you very much. So we are called to order. Our roll's been taken, and we have an action item right off the bat to approve the committee agenda and the work plan. It's been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion on either one of those? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. Any abstentions? All righty, we are approved then. The first item of business after this is our minutes from June 9th. Is there a second? It's been moved and seconded. Any comments? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. Any abstentions? Okay, we have 2 abstentions. And our next action item is the General Counsel compensation evaluation. We'll go ahead and turn this over to Melissa.
Thank you, Chairperson Dillon. So this item covers the evaluation for the General Counsel position compensation. As a reminder, a request was made at the last Compensation Committee to bring this evaluation to a future meeting. Staff reached out to McLaughlin, and Michael Oak with McLaughlin Partners is here to present the findings of the compensation evaluation. Before I hand it over to Michael, though, I would like to provide the committee with background highlights of the General Counsel position, the establishment, and the salary of that position. In January of 2008, the General Counsel position was established and included in the board's salary setting authority. During that time, a salary was set as well, and that included salary and incentive. Then, in January of 2010, a decision by the committee was made to remove the General Counsel from the incentive plan. And so, at the time, the incentive was 15%. That was removed from the position's total cash opportunity with no change in salary. Then in November of 2013, the committee assessed the pay again for the General Counsel. At that time, McLaughlin provided an analysis of that and determined that the pay was competitive to salary only from our comparator group. We did not consider the total cash opportunity. So I just wanted to highlight that point. And then more recently, in November of last year, well, not so recent, it seems recent, but we're almost a year in, the committee approved a 5% increase to the max of the General Counsel position salary. And so if there are no questions, I'll hand it over to Michael to walk us through the analysis. And the objective for the committee today is to take action on either an alternative of salary only or salary and incentive for the General Counsel position.
Thanks, Melissa. So as Melissa described, what we did is we assembled competitive data from the board-approved peer group, which, as a reminder, is a 67% weighting to leading public funds and a 33% weighting to private sector, broad range private sector firms. So going on to page attachment 1, item 3, page 3, CalSTR's current salary range is behind the competitive market. So the left-hand side of the page shows salary only, and the right-hand side of the page for the market shows salary and additional cash compensation from cash incentives. So if you look at the salary only on the left-hand side of the page, I'll focus on the midpoint of the median, which is the gray bar going across. You see that the CalSTR's midpoint of 205 is below the salary only of 233. And then when you factor in cash incentives in the competitive market, that 233 at median becomes 415 from a total cash perspective. So you see that you're a little bit behind in salary, and then when you consider total cash compensation, you're actually quite a bit behind market. All clear so far? So what we did is we said, given your pay philosophy is to pay median total cash versus this peer group, we provided two alternatives to do that. One would be a salary-only alternative, and the second is to have a salary plus incentive. So this is a similar format to what we presented at the last meeting for the actuary positions. So it's probably easier to skip through to the chart on the next page where it says at the top of the page is salary only at 90% of median total cash. So again, this idea of using somewhat below median is that the salary plus incentive is not guaranteed, meaning that's the maximum incentive that could be earned. So in all likelihood, it would be somewhat less than that actual earned over time. So to have a fixed pay, we would suggest that that would be less than what you could have with an incentive. So we use the 90% consistent with the last analysis. So that would be, for example, 90% of the 415 is around 375. So that this alternative would bring the current salary midpoint of 205 to 375. And you can see with the various bars how that compares to the competitive market in blue, and then to the extent that you think it's relevant, your peers across the river there. Question so far? So then alternative two is a balance of salary and an incentive opportunity. So we use a 20% incentive opportunity for internal equity purposes. So that would mean that the 205 current salary would go to the proposed salary with the 20% opportunity would be the 414 over to the right-hand side of the page, or the salary only going from 205 to 268 plus that 20%. So again, that would bring your median total comp with max incentive to 414 versus the market of 415.
We don't have anybody in queue yet.
So then the questions we have on the last page of the McLaughlin report is there a desire to increase the salary, bringing it aligned with your pay philosophy to the peers? If so, is a desire to have a salary-only approach, salary plus incentive, and then there's some additional questions that may follow depending on where you end up with there.
Alrighty. And I will say for the record that our general counsel is not present in the room for the discussion, so we should feel free to have a frank and open discussion about it. Jack?
If I could just add one comment from my seat in the thing, and it's really for me the important slide is actually Comp 18. You know, the only difficulty with the way you approach all these positions is that, you know, you're tapping into that external market and getting data. And, you know, when running a business, you really need to look out and in and bring the two judgments together, not just look out. If we ran the entire organization by looking out, it would create a mishmash of internal equity issues. So I was very interested when Melissa put this together for us to kind of see what the McLaughlin recommendations did relative to internal equity, because frankly, it creates sometimes odd results. So, and this is the part that gets managed in the organization. So regardless of which alternative you're comfortable with, I think you want to bring those two together, those views. And I was comfortable with the recommendations because however you see those and how I think about the responsibilities in the organization for this position and where it's located, as you can see currently near the bottom. Now, the chart also has two other glaring problems that aren't on your agenda for today, and hopefully we're going to address those through legislation. But relative to the general counsel, I thought it brought both views together well, the McLaughlin work plus this chart that Melissa put together internally. So I was comfortable with the recommendations.
All right. Melissa, did you have anything else you wanted to add before we went to our speaking list?
No.
All righty. Irena?
Question of the internal equity, Jacqueline. What is your thinking about taking this action today when we have all the board controlled positions coming back in April for a review, and then also the pending legislation on adding the two positions, and whether or not we would.
April one was actually meant. I'm sorry. The April review was not all. It was actually meant to be the investment staff, because you had just gone through because you had started picking them off one by one. You actually reviewed my position several months back. You just recently reviewed the system actuary. You had a board member request this review today. So you're right, there is one more round of this if the legislation is signed relative to the COO and CFO. We would still, do the same exercise and then bring it into an internal equity perspective. I mean, I would expect, my point wasn't so much timing and sequence, it was only my fear that you look at the whole thing together and make sure it stays sensible. Given the responsibilities of the general counsel, I think it's pretty clear it's not in the proper ranking in this internal equity chart. Your point's well. I think I know where you're going there, but relative to the investment staff positions, which will be evaluated in the spring, those numbers could jumble that up a little bit more.
So which positions on the list are we evaluating in the spring?
You'd be evaluating all the investment, basically management positions. So that's CIO, deputy CIO, investment director, portfolio manager, director of investment operations, associate portfolio manager.
That covered it, yeah.
I'm sorry.
That covered it all.
Oh, thanks. And then depending upon when the legislation were signed, we would bring those two other back to you.
Brandon, do you have any?
Yeah, can I just ask a separate question on the comparator group issue? And I think we might have talked about this before, but if you can remind me, we don't use a total compensation comparator we only look at salary and incentive, right? And why is the reason that we don't look at any total compensation issues?
I believe the way the comp policy is written now, it's total cash, which is our salary and incentive only. Total comp would be inclusive of other factors.
No, Michael, I've worked this area a long time. Michael, you might have a different perspective. I've tried those in other positions I've had of looking at total comp. It is so difficult to attach the metrics to those other, to the non-cash side of it, to actually do it as precise as this chart would like you to be. I think it's something, we've had board members raise that earlier in the process of getting these positions, particularly around the defined benefit plan being its value. From my view, if I were in your seats, I think it's something you have to attach as a variable in interpreting the results. I don't know that we can mathematically give a good calculation of that. At least I haven't seen the consulting houses do that. There's techniques, but I haven't seen something that comes out that precisely. But it's a fair comment for all it's certainly not just the topic today, but across the board. It's a fair topic. Having said that, as you know better than anyone, PEPRA does neutralize the value for new hires quite a bit on the DB side, given these salary levels, for sure.
Well,
Michael, do you have a different view on why total comp isn't used more often as a calculation? In case you're in the business, so.
Yeah, no, your view is consistent with ours, that it's difficult to get an accurate and apples-to-apples comparison of those benefits and how they're reported and calculated, et cetera. So we do have colleagues within our parent company, Ann Hewitt, who can come up with a number for you and tell you year 1 versus 1.2, but that 1.2 is really a interpretable range around that. And I think I've
used the Hewitt analysis before, but when you get into very senior executives, you're going to get into even more additional forms of compensation that aren't even potentially brought into here, I would argue.
And what we have done, if you go back to Comp 15, page 6 at the top right, there's a note in the top that says salary plus cash bonus excludes long-term incentives, restricted stock options, et cetera. So to some extent, we've considered that in the competitive market. So others would view those pay elements as direct compensation. But recognizing the private sector, for the vast majority of them, don't have DB plans and benefits maybe less. We are not including what can be a significant piece, and definitely is a significant piece, restricted stock grants, mutual fund deferrals, stock options, things like that. So we're actually already, to some extent, excluding a piece of direct compensation within the private sector peers.
And I think for me, what is really limiting in not having any kind of comparison is, at the Department of Finance, of course, when we're doing the analyses of contract agreements, and we do have a very clear calculation of what the benefit cost is. And so for a miscellaneous employee in the state, it's 55% of pay. So that when I see that number, then the total comp is much higher than what we see in the list. But I have nothing to compare it to when we're looking at where that fits in the comparator group, right?
There get to be, that is true from a financial calculation on benefits, but if you were trying to benchmark it to the market, what healthcare costs and those things would differ a lot depending upon the nature of the healthcare.
Right.
I mean, you get into some variables that make that a difficult comparative calculation. You know, the other piece I would throw in, because I know you're looking at that 1/3 data here too and trying to understand its impact, I think you have to reflect here, is this job much like for that third of the data that's coming in and bringing that calculation to where it to be, how similar is this job to a general counsel in the private sector to justify the comparator group the way it is? So I've thought about this a lot, and you know, I don't say this a lot here, but I tend to view this like a life insurance company, what we do, much like that. In my own personal experience, working very closely with general counsels for years in that business, is that this position is quite different than a GC at, I'm not going to name a certain agency, but another state agency. I mean, there's no doubt this recommendation takes this much different than state pay for senior attorneys. But I do see a legitimate comparison in the job duties here to what I worked with GCs in the private sector on life insurance companies. So I think the responsibilities are pretty real here and growing. Just as we in the private sector, compliance, cybersecurity, all these issues that you're dealing with here are evident in that GC job in the private sector. So that's why, at least when I first looked at this, I thought about it a lot, and I thought this is a reasonable comparison still to a private sector's responsibilities. Some jobs in the state aren't. It's not a fair comparison because we have control agencies that pick up some of the duties. In terms of our legal function here, I don't have another control agency really picking up part of these job duties. That's my take.
You have anything further right now? Alrighty. So we have our data points. We have a good spot to start our discussion. I have a couple people in line. Harry?
Thanks, Madam Chair. So thanks for the report and presentation. I'm actually the member of the committee that's requested this information, really from two perspectives. One is the internal equity and the externally competitive approach or philosophy. So I'm looking at INV, and I should also say I do believe the incumbent has served this system well and consistently well for some time, which has some weight to this person. INV 16 comp 16. CalSTRS current salary is $252. Is that correct? The CalPERS current salary, not including incentive, is $322. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. So that is, I think, a 27% discrepancy, if my math is accurate. It's roughly that. So I know we have these competitive groups, but as to take Mr. Boykin's term, I don't want to get us into an arms race with our friends next door. But from my perspective, they in many ways are, and we are, competing for talent here in Sacramento. Okay, so there's this discrepancy in that external, the two positions. As was noted in 2000, and I think it was 13, we removed the 15% incentive comp for this position here at CalSTRS.
That was in 2010.
2010,
Yeah.
Thank you. 2010. CalPERS has an incentive comp, and if I'm reading this chart correctly, the maximum pay at CalPERS could be $450.
Correct. So their incentive
So that's a 40%,
percent. Correct.
potentially a discrepancy of 40% in compensation, which I think we have an opportunity to close that discrepancy and be more competitive with our closest, comparable organization. The second area that I'd like to look at is on Comp 18. And this addresses internally equitable. I think for obvious reasons we want to, and we support an internally equitable compensation scheme. So most recently we made some adjustments to the system actuary. And we did so to retain talent and to maintain a competitive, to be as competitive as we possibly can when we identify talent and be able. So I think by doing that, we, one of the unintended consequences was, from my perspective, has created some internal inequity that we can address today by making an adjustment. So this presentation, this data, I think provides enough evidence for us to make a decision to, and I'm sensitive to timing. I don't know when that should happen, or I'm hoping there's enough support on the committee to make an adjustment. What I would like to take off the table is the incentive comp. We took it off in 2010. I don't want to go back and forth. We're going to have incentive comp for this position. We're not going to have it. And as I understand it, the external general counsels, it's really not an apples to apples comparison. I think our CEO spoke a little bit. We're more like I think Jack said, an insurance agency and not a financial.
Exciting life insurance company.
Exciting. Yeah. So I'd like to take the incentive comp off the table and just speak about one, is there levels of support for an increase to the base salary to the general counsel position? And those are my initial thoughts, Madam Chair. So I'm not going to put a motion on the board table at this point.
All right.
Hear other people's comments.
We'll continue.
Thanks.
Paul?
Thank you. So, if we went with Harry's approach of only looking at cash compensation and not incentive, we would be going from at the midpoint from 205 to 375, which would be an 83% increase. And at the high end, we would be going from 252 to 444, which I calculate as a 76% increase. Do we have any experience of increasing any senior staff person's compensation by that percentage?
We had a similar experience when we conducted the 2013 comparator group change for the investment management positions, and we implemented a transition phase to get staff to the new minimum because there was a significant increase in the max.
Significant meaning what? I mean, I would say 25% is significant. Were we talking 83%?
I'm sorry, excuse me.
Were we talking 83%, which is what we're talking about here?
I don't know the numbers right off the top, but I know there was a significant increase enough to implement a transitional phase for staff to get there, just to the minimum.
I'd like to know that because I think this is a very large increase and kind of an unusually large increase that you know. I mean, we're bringing in private sector comparator group. I worked in the private sector for, most of my life, and you might increase the salary to attract people, but very unusual that you would have somebody who's already in a job and increase their salary by 83%. I just don't know it. And I've done searches on both private and nonprofit boards, and it's often been that we've changed the salary to attract people, but to retain people, an 83% increase is, I think, pretty unheard of and usually pretty unnecessary.
Just from a calculation standpoint, your number is correct to the median, but I just want to point out the transitional part of it. He's at 252, so if we want to actually calculate what the real percentage change, it would be to some number between 281 and 305 if you stuck to the external data. I mean, I think you're right.
You mean we wouldn't put him in the same,
You'd go to the minimum. That's what we did all the investment staff.
so you'd go from, he's right now at the maximum
You'd go to the minimum.
you go to the minimum.
We always, and basically in the case of the investment staff, that's actually what Melissa was saying. In the case of the investment staff, the reach was so high to the minimum for the new investment staff that we had to use a multi-year implementation strategy. And it would depend what you all decide, if anything today, how much the reach would be. In general, we've tried to stay, I think, Melissa, close to about 20% at most for the reach. The bill in the legislature has a 10% qualifier in it, but it would be to the minimum would be our focus administering the system. But the pay opportunity is exactly what you said over time.
So he would go from 252 to
Whatever your new minimum is, whatever you decide.
Well,
So-
what's being proposed here is 305.6,
Well,
right?
if you chose that, yeah,
I'm just saying
Yep.
what's in the proposal.
it would be that.
Okay.
And if it was around 20%, we would, it's your choice, but we would recommend doing that in 1 year. If it was more like investment staff, we did it over 2 years.
So Jack, I didn't think that these are the numbers that come out in the formula that we've asked for.
Yes,
It's not necessarily the recommendation that's being made, it's the data points we have to make the decision we want to make.
yeah, you're in
correct?
charge of it.
So, Paul, I don't think we need to,
Right.
I was just.
I don't want to
I
assume that
understand
that's.
not the proposal.
Yeah.
Those are the numbers that came out
Right.
based on what
I
we,
just want to
what we've
explain
asked.
how we
Okay.
administer the pay
Okay,
plan.
so,
Right,
We
so it's
generally
up to
take people
us
to minimums.
where we go with it.
right.
Yeah. And then, Paul, once they reach the minimum, the pay policy is between the minimum, and I just wanted the whole picture, so if it's all on the table. The way the pay policy works for this exempt group is, I've administered it, if you're between the minimum and the median, we've given employees fairly robust raises going up to the median, meaning about up to 10%. When they hit the median, it's been my perspective to limit the raises to the same that other state employees are getting, which is 5%. So a higher velocity to the median. At the median, I've restricted to 5%.
I mean, the other thing I think that I share with Arena is that there may be difficulties in accounting for defined benefit pension, but my own experience, having been in state service, in a very high, in my opinion, very high position, deputy state treasurer, where I was at the high end of the range and I was making a lot less than anybody on this page, Comp 18. I left because I didn't have a pension. I left because I started work at age 56, and there was never any way that I was going to have a pension that would make any sense to me. If I had a pension, if I had a fully funded CalPERS pension, having worked in state service for 20, 25, 30 years, it would have made a huge difference. Just an absolutely huge difference. So in my mind, I can't take that out of the equation. It may be our policy. It may be that there's some reason that we can't count that, but it's massively important if you are comparing to the private sector, and that's just my experience speaking. So I can't feel comfortable only looking at the cash compensation as we look at this. The only other thing I would say is I think we're going back and forth here between talking about, we talk a lot about being competitive, and the point is we're only competitive when we're out there trying to hire somebody or out there trying to retain somebody. And if we're neither hiring nor retaining, we have somebody, just like when I was at the state treasurer's office, who agreed to take the job at these rates of pay. So I don't know whether, moving them up, so I don't know what the current level is compared to the midpoint. I guess that's going from 252 to 375. So that's a 50% increase over a few years is really a wise and necessary expenditure of system assets.
Hold tight. Technical difficulties.
I'm done. For now.
I can't move my mouse. We have a speaker in queue. I can't get in queue because my mouse is not being happy. How did you do that?
Goes back to the infrastructure discussion. It's great until it doesn't
Oh,
work.
okay, okay. And then it's just touch? Okay. Harry?
Can I, and I don't disagree with some of the comments that Mr. Rosensteel made. I think those are issues we've been wrestling with at the compensation committee for years. And how do you value all of this? And so I'm not going to go into all of it. On Comp 18, where you have the general counsel, it looks like it's in a purple color. 306 to 444, that's with no incentive comp. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. The current compensation is 252. The CalPERS current compensation base salary is 322. A move from 252 to 306 is approximately a 20% increase. And that 20% increase, I think, then becomes, it addresses the externally competitive, and then internally, the adjustments we recently made to other positions, specifically the actuary positions. I think that addresses the internal inequity that exists. I'm going to make a motion, Madam Chair, that we move to an incentive comp for the general counsel, and that's the range, is they're recommending, is that minimum would be 306 base, no incentive, max would be 444.
Okay.
I know that's what it says in front of us, but I don't do this for a living, so I need your help, Mr. Oak, to confirm that my reading of this document is in fact.
So Comp 18 actually shows rounded numbers, so it's 305, 6, and some decimals after that.
Right.
Exactly, and then, so the, how this was derived was a midpoint of exactly 375.
Yes.
And then the high and low based on the normal range. So the proposal I think you're trying to make would be a midpoint of 375 with the range being whatever the pennies end up being 305.6 to 444.4.
Yes, so I'd like to put that on the table as a motion, and for it to be, I guess the other decision we'd have to make is retroact. When would it be effective? What's the most effective date? And I would, I'm open to that. That's a less important concern to me. The larger issue is internally equitable, externally competitive, and those are my primary concerns. Notwithstanding some of the issues that Paul has raised, that all of us have wrestled with, how do you put a value on defined benefit? Those are all valid concerns.
Harry, can you go ahead and give me the parameters again of the range?
The range would be 306 to 444. It would be moving the general counsel to a salary of 306 would be the minimum of that range, with an effective date I'd really like some guidance and thoughts and see whether or not there's support, first of all, to move to that range. And if there is, then, and perhaps maybe then we do it separately, is we decide when the implementation date would be. And there are other moving parts that are going on, and I don't know whether or not those moving parts would affect when we want to implement this.
So 306 to
444.
444.
Yes, it's on comp.
the purple
Yeah,
line.
comp 18.
And that's
All
the
right,
no
thank you.
incentive
No
alternative.
incentive.
Right. Alrighty,
And I would just say, you know, as far as an effective date, I think it would be appropriate, being just entering the new fiscal year, to have it effective July 1st of this fiscal year. Otherwise, we would push it out until, I guess I don't, unless the effective date would be September or November. I don't know what the committee's desire is as far as,
so Melissa, what you're saying is it doesn't necessarily have to go a fiscal year, it could be mid-fiscal year to take effect whenever?
So January 1st of 2017.
It could.
Would be my suggestion. So it would be January.
Is that what you're gonna put in your
Yeah,
motion?
so it'd be January 1st. It wouldn't go back to July, but it would be
Okay.
effective January 1st of 2017. The general counsel range would be adjusted to a minimum of 306 to a maximum of 444. This makes the general counsel position competitive with our most like fund CalPERS general counsel position, and it addresses some internal equity issues as well.
All right, is there a second? Is there a second to the motion? Jennifer, who all do I get? I get Lorena, Paul, me. Okay. There is not a second for the motion, so the motion dies. We can continue speaking. I have two people on the list. Irena?
Since the first motion did not receive a second, I would offer a different motion, which is to defer the decision until April, when I believe the issue is coming back for the other positions under the board control, and we would know the outcome of the bill to add additional positions under board control, and consider the issue at that time, so that we're looking at the entire list as we consider the internal equity question. And secondly, to ask that some information be brought back that makes an attempt to quantify or compare as I mentioned, 55% of payroll that is currently part of the compensation that our miscellaneous employees receive.
Arnie, do you want to speak any further to it? Paul?
No, I don't need to speak.
Harry? Did you want to speak to it as a seconder?
No, I think I'll wait until there's an information request.
All right. So the motion is to defer the decision to April and to gather more data. And the data was on the how we dealt with previous.
Well, it would be, I don't know what it would look like, but it would be some attempts to analyze what the, using the
As long as
comparative
they
group.
know what you're
Yeah.
asking for?
Yeah, I'm not even suggesting that it's gonna be perfect, and it may be that there's a lot of caveats to what's provided to us at that time, but I think it would be helpful to at least be able to have that conversation.
And okay. Well, and I guess to go along, I mean, if we're going to take a look at that part of it, let me ask Michael, because having a conversation about the comparators and the value that we would attach to total compensation, I know there's a driver from the private sector, but if we're going to include total cash, I would imagine that there's a variety on other benefits that even the public sector gets. I know that CalSTRS members are not part of Social Security. I know CalPERS is split. Some are, some aren't, but I know that there's other states and could possibly be in our public comparator group that are DB plus Social Security, or maybe just DB, or can be very, if they could even be in some sort of cash balance plan, or so. I understand why that it's difficult, so could we let's not just take a look at the total comp on that private side, but also on the public side also, and do you understand what I'm looking for, right, Michael?
Yep.
All righty. So is there any further discussion? Oh, yep, we got two. Lynn?
Thank you. So as part of that information request, if we could also get an average tenure in the state public pension system for a chief counsel, because I would imagine a lot of chief counsel candidates are coming from the outside. And so, to your point, Paul, although if you started with the state when you're 25, it would be a very valuable benefit. If you just started, when you only have 10 years, it's not as valuable.
Michelle?
Sort of similar but different to Lynn's comment. I wondered about succession planning and when we raise the general counsel bar, what that looks like for those who might be looking to advance in their careers here at CalSTRS, and what that looks like as far as a jump as we increase the general counsel salary, knowing that we do have more limitations on the staff that he oversees. So just wonder if we could look at that too.
All righty. Is there any further comment? Harry?
I think when, in the external groups and the incentive comp, if I'm correct, a lot of incentive comp in the private sector has to do with securities litigation and recapturing of, no, yes, I'm seeing,
Well, it's not law firms, remember, these are GCs. That are in the corporate firms. So they're not being paid through, they're not doing, they're doing defense, if anything, they're not doing securities litigation. So they're being paid, their incentive, Michael, correct me if I'm wrong, was coming from general corporate profiting, and that you would have for senior executives, not through a litigation approach.
Yeah, so the cash incentives here would be made actually like on a discretionary basis at most of those firms. So there'd be a pool funded based on corporate results of revenue or profit. And then the GC would be getting a discretionary.
These are all defense people, yeah.
I've got lawsuits on my mind
That's
from,
right, yeah. It's no law, it's not a law firm comparison, it's corporate, yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Harry. And Irena, if I could, when you talk about deferring, is it just this position to April to do with the investment side? Or are you asking for everyone on both sides?
CFO and the COO, if we pass the bill, is what your motion was. Or suggestion, I think.
I just want to I want to make sure that we're clear and staff is clear.
Yeah, I mean, my suggestion, my motion would be that we only look at this issue one time, and that's with all the positions that are available to us to make the decision on it in April.
Alrighty. So is there anybody on the non-investment side other than those two positions that are pending litigation and this? Or do we need to look at everything? Everybody, like, go back to the actuary and all that?
Well, I defer to you, we just did those, but, yeah.
I
The only two that are pending are the COO and the CFO
Right.
on the legislation side.
Right.
Which we have to wait to see what
Okay.
happens.
I didn't know that there were any others that we were.
Well, I just look at it the investment side and the other side.
Well, you've just done the actuaries, of course, and so,
Yeah.
and you did
I was
mine
only
a month
looking at the
before that.
list that's on Comp 18.
Okay. All right. So, no one else in the speaking list? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. Any abstentions? All right, motion passes. All righty, moving on. Review of information requests, Jennifer? I think that we've just kind of discussed it. We think we've got it. All righty, draft agenda. Jack, do you want to say anything about the draft agenda, or Melissa?
We have to incorporate the work today. We'll incorporate the
Yeah.
motion from Raina into that work plan then. And then,
I think the agenda, we don't have anything planned for November other than the disclosure
Okay,
item.
Right, our CFO, CO bill is now pending on the governor's desk, so we would expect decision by the end of this month, so we'll notify you what that decision is.
And he only has till the end of the month to sign all
Right.
outstanding, correct?
Yes.
Alrighty. Any statements from the public? Seeing none, we will go into closed session really quickly. We have minutes to approve in closed session.
Gosh, I'm sorry. Yes.
You're welcome. And I imagine we're close to noon, so lunch would be ready. The board was going to start at 12:30. Do we, for those members of the public that are staying, do we want to say, let's start at 12:45? Give us 45 minutes for lunch. That gives them a little bit more time. All righty. I can do that. Hi, Loretta.